welcome to the Investigative Journal. I'm Tal Heinrich. The Netherlands is one of the top 5 European countries with the largest percentage of Muslims. Like other EU member states, the Netherlands has developed its own counter-extremism programs and integration policies that aim to prevent radicalization among second-generation Muslim youth. Lately, the Investigative Journal has published a damning report on the shape of these efforts. The report was written by a former senior counter-terrorism analyst at the Dutch Military Intelligence Service, Mr. Ronald Sandee, who is joining us on set today. Mr. Sandee is the co-founder and CEO of Blue Water Intelligence, an investigative company in the Netherlands and the United States. Welcome to the program, Ronald. You started the report writing, and I'm quoting, "Amsterdam faces a huge security crisis and no one is paying attention." If you can explain, why do you believe that there are red flags all around that nobody's paying attention?
Well, there are many things. There have been multiple whistleblowers actually who have said to the city of Amsterdam, there's something wrong, do something about it. And they basically didn't respond to it. Instead of, these whistleblowers they just don't like them and they do nothing about it and they keep going on. Even there are multiple times being said, hey, this might go wrong, people. People, instead of de-radicalizing others, they are being sent to Syria. So there must be something wrong. But it seems the city is not willing to change its policies.
Before we start diving into de-radicalization, let's talk a bit about the symptoms or what leads young Muslims to this, because many experts believe, for example, that a major factor that leads eventually to radicalization of Muslim youth, especially second generation, is what we call an identity crisis. If we talk about the Netherlands or more broadly in Europe, the feeling that on one hand they are alienated from local society and on the other hand don't really belong in their origins. And then you have Islam, a religion, which is an umbrella that welcomes everyone, where everyone feels they belong. Do you think that's still the main case, though, in 2019?
I think it is still a case, but it depends on the groups. And the Dutch Moroccans are generally more susceptible to this message, whereas you have the Turkeys, also a large minority in the Netherlands. They keep it more to themselves. They have more control within their own community. But there is this big divide between parents and children in the Dutch Moroccan community. So that makes these young Moroccans more susceptible to it. And we also see it already from Morocco itself, where the country of Morocco is saying, what is happening there in Europe? All those young Moroccans are coming back on vacation to Morocco, and they're bringing us Salafism, Muslim Brotherhood ideology. So they're bringing us all these radical ideologies that are alien to our own country. So there is definitely something going on. But you will also see immediately that there is a problem with democracy, and the borders of democracy is what we are really reaching in Europe, because it is religion, there's freedom of religion, even though religion might have anti-integrative, anti-isolationism and all that kind of stuff. We don't feel that we can do anything about it.
You really criticize some of the Dutch government's practices and efforts in trying to de-radicalize young Muslim youth. Where do you think the government employees go so wrong in these efforts?
One of the problems is, I think, that you have bureaucracy coming up with ideas that is made by bureaucracy. So instead of working on de-radicalization by someone who has a strong understanding of religion, they go in with administrative procedures and they think they can help it as a social worker. Whereas in the Netherlands is definitely totally secular. They don't have that understanding anymore for how can I reach someone who is a believer, because they don't believe themselves anymore.
Just out of curiosity, are there other Western countries where you believe this is being done better?
I don't really know. I see this problem in most Western countries, and I think no one has found the golden solution.
Now, one eye-opening story, really, that you describe in your report is that the Dutch government's hiring of a de-radicalization coach. His name is Bilal Amrani, and you write that he himself is a dangerous person. How come? Who is Bilal?
Bilal Amrani, he was a member of the Hofstad group, which was the first indigenous Dutch terrorism group. And Bilal was involved in threatening a Dutch politician, Wilders. He was convicted for that, and then while he was in jail, he started radicalizing others for the jihad. And he got another sentence for 3 years. So he got out of jail, he went through a de-radicalization program, and he later said openly himself in the press, I don't believe in de-radicalization, by the way. I never de-radicalized. And he was hired by the city of Amsterdam as a de-radicalization coach.
Why?
Yeah, ask Amsterdam, I would say. He seems to have been especially helped by Mayor Eberhard van der Laan at that point, who wanted him as a kind like an example, like something is good. So, but it was not good. There were young boys who were basically sent to Bilal for de-radicalization. They ended up in Syria. And the city did nothing about him. They just paid him a salary.
And their parents even complained about him.
Yeah, the parents even said it, and still the city didn't want to take action against him.
But really, you revealed this information. The parents revealed this information. Why would the Dutch government still pay him a salary?
Because the city doesn't want to see its own mistake. They still are not admitting at this time that they made a mistake. So for them, everything is still okay as long as you don't talk about it. And now it comes out, so now they have to take a stand for the first time. And generally, there were people who told them about Bilal, and they just didn't take action.
And speaking of government money, city money, or the way we should really call it, taxpayer money, in the Netherlands, you mentioned there's a very strict separation between state and church, which means that the state does not fund churches or synagogues, let's say. But you write that in certain cases, it does give certain fundings to mosques.
Yeah, what we see in the Netherlands is definitely that money is being given indirectly to a kind of foundations that are part of the mosque organization, for something like a special foundation for women who meet once a week or twice a week, where they sit down and talk about things that are happening with their children in the neighborhood. And these kind of meetings are being paid for by the government with thousands of euros. And what we see normally is that it only costs a little bit of coffee, and we give some sweets. So it is probably a couple of hundred of euros, but all the other money that comes in generally goes to the mosque. So indirectly, the city of Amsterdam is funding multiple mosques in Amsterdam, where the exploitation of the mosque and the rent is being paid for by taxpayer money. Yeah.
So to sum it up, do you believe that the city of Amsterdam is, trying to throw money at the problem when it comes to de-radicalization?
I think they're willingly neglecting the problem of radicalization, and I think they try to keep everything quiet by bribing them off one way or another. It almost looks like bribing people off of not telling anything about it, ignore the problem, and basically, keep things within a small group of people who are organizing it. And that's an interesting part as well that we see, is that in Amsterdam there's a small group of second generation, third generation Moroccan Dutch people who are basically running the de-radicalization program. I think the Moroccans are only a part of the problem, as you also have indigenous Muslims who radicalize, you have Turkish Muslims who radicalize, and there are Somalian Muslims that radicalize in the Netherlands, and Iraqis.
You described that some of the money that is being invested by the government in these communities actually ends up as part of corruption and bribe stories?
That's what whistleblowers told me, that some of the money that was being given for some of these projects ends up in Morocco, where some people invest in real estate.
That's really unbelievable, Ronald. We're taking a short break here, but stick around with us. We have much more to discuss with you, including the current shape of the terrorist Hofstad network in the Netherlands, that is the group behind the assassination of filmmaker Theo van Gogh.
The investigative journal TIJ offers exclusive long-form investigations into the leading political, environmental, and public interest issues of the day. Our first-hand investigations focus on topics ranging from human rights, counterterrorism, corruption, cybercrime, just to name a few. These bombshell reports can only be found on the investigative journal from New York. I'm Tal Heinrich.
Welcome back to the Investigative Journal. We continue to focus on the Netherlands and its de-radicalization programs for migrant population and second-generation Muslim youth. 2004 was a year that shaped the discourse and boosted the Dutch government's strategy on counterterrorism. The country was shaken by the assassination of publicist and filmmaker Theo van Gogh. He was murdered by a member of the terrorist Hofstad group after he finished a critical documentary on Islam's treatment of women. The Hofstad network is the group of violent Islamist extremists, known for their links to the terror networks in Spain and Belgium. They are inspired by the ideology of Takfir wal Hijra. It's an extreme offshoot of the Muslim Brotherhood. After a decade-long battle against extremists connected to the Hofstad network, the Dutch government believed that they had largely disabled this group's ability to carry out acts of political violence. And Dutch representative even said so in her testimony before the US Senate. But our guest today believes otherwise. Back with us here on set is Ronald Sandee, a former senior counterterrorism analyst at the Dutch Military Intelligence Service. Ronald, in the report that you wrote for the Investigative Journal, you mentioned the murder of Theo van Gogh as a turning point for counterterrorism efforts in the Netherlands. What has changed between 2004 and now in terms of the Netherlands' efforts?
I think the efforts have been extremely big. We have gotten an organization, the National Counterterrorism and Security Advisor's Office. So we have a dedicated office that's only monitoring radicalization and terrorism, also linked to Islamic terrorism. We also have all kinds of companies popped up. There's a de-radicalization business right now. It's pretty huge, and there are all kinds of efforts, even at the local city level, to try to de-radicalize it. But what we mainly saw after Van Gogh was that the Dutch government focused on the main Salafist centers, as they saw them as the main centers of anti-integrative activities and radicalization. What we saw was that the government didn't have a good view of what was happening there. Well, in the years following, they got a pretty good view what happened, but they also reached the ends of the democracy, because what we saw while the government was monitoring and trying to tone down these Salafist centers, what really happened was that a second generation and a third generation of Salafist preachers got out as wandering preachers, and they spread Salafism not from 4 main centers in 4 big cities to all over the country. So anti-integrative Islam has grown enormously since. Although the government was thinking that they had everything under control, they were catch by surprise in late 2012 when at once a whole football team and about a couple of dozen people had traveled to Syria to fight. And they really were saying, oh, something went wrong here.
Back to the Hofstad network, the group responsible for the murder of Theo van Gogh. What's their status now?
Well, the Hofstad group generally was dismantled, but some individual members like Bilal Lamrani, but also others like Ahmed Hamdi, they are still active in Amsterdam and in the surroundings. And according to reports I'm getting from people in the field, is that these guys are pretty active in recruiting for the jihad and radicalizing people.
We mentioned that it's a group inspired by an extreme offshoot of the Muslim Brotherhood, and you point out in your report to the existence of Muslim Brotherhood-owned mosques in Amsterdam. You specifically mention a person, Imam Yassin El-Furqani. Who is he?
Yassin El-Furqani is a young Dutch Moroccan who graduated from Leiden University in Islam. And he is this young imam, and he publicly denies that he's Muslim Brotherhood, of course. But since at least the late 29s, 2010s, he is popping up all the time at meetings of the Muslim Brotherhood everywhere in the Netherlands. And he's also a member of one of the most influential organizations that is in official contact between the Muslim community and the Dutch government. But the most interesting part is he and his company generally made the deradicalization program for the city of Amsterdam. And he was paid for it. Yeah.
What would you like to see the Dutch government do in terms of countering radicalization? I mean, is there a practice that you believe is efficient and the Dutch government is not trying? Do you feel that the Dutch government is, unfortunately, I hate to say it, maybe waiting for the next Theo van Gogh to happen in order to increase efforts?
I believe that most people working in the de-radicalization field have the feeling that they do very meaningful work. So let me say that first. That needs to be said. But also with the de-radicalization programs, the only 4 examples in the Netherlands of de-radicalizations generally were people who de-radicalized themselves. So no program is actually able to work on that. Maybe they can counter certain things in an early stage. I don't know that, but I think that the government should acknowledge that hiring radicals and creating programs made by people linked to Muslim Brotherhood ideology is not working.
Ronald, what about the public discourse around radicalization of Muslim youth and second generation in the Netherlands? I know that in some European Union countries, for example, like Germany and Sweden, there's an increasing uproar against authorities, for example, that sometimes they conceal or hide descriptions of criminals, let's say, for fear of being seen as racist or encouraging violence against minority communities. Is that something that you also see happening in the Netherlands? Yeah,
you definitely see that happening in the Netherlands, especially where on the local level, where you have social democrats still controlling everything, and also in the media, you see really a lot of things is being done by, how shall we say, the good mensch, who basically tries to speak everything right, and in the end, they are not willing to name the problem by its real name.
But this could end up being even more dangerous.
Absolutely, yeah. And one of those main problems is also in the Netherlands, like in other countries, it's poisoned the debate. You have people on what you could say the right wing who are basically attacking everything, and people on the left who are protecting them and trying to bring them in for electoral reasons in their political parties. So it is a little bit poisoned, but I hope that this report will help them to start a national discourse and that they get to terms on it.
So thank you for this report, Ronald Sandee, and also thank you for joining us on the show of the Investigative Journal. That does it for this episode from Times Square, New York. I'm Tal Heinrich. Thank you all for watching.